Let's outline why it's legitimate to call the ACT Party racist. A group of Māori leaders have sent a letter to the National Party asking them to condemn racism from the likes of ACT and New Zealand First. Not surprisingly, David Seymour milked the situation for media, and he'll probably do the same to this video.
It's a trap!
In David's response to the iwi leaders, he highlights several examples from Te Pāti Māori, essentially accusing them of racism, saying the iwi leaders aren't being consistent. However, none of the examples that David produced have any real-world implications. For example, it's easy to make the argument that racism in government legislation leads to unequal outcomes based on someone's race. However, saying one race is better than the other at sports, well, you'd have to be a snowflake of epic proportions to even take notice of such a thing, especially when it's coming from an oppressed group that's just trying to up themselves. In fact, it's cancel culture gone mad. Racism isn't simply saying another race is better than the other at X, Y, Z, or to say that you hate that brown person over there. Racism is mainly structural, where aspects of our society lead to worse outcomes for someone because of their ancestry. And that's the kicker. Those who benefit from these structures have the responsibility to carry themselves in a way that doesn't further discriminate against those who are oppressed by these unfair systems. Schools teach a Pākehā curriculum. Hospitals and things like our dietary guidelines operate at times in ignorance to anything outside of the Pākehā worldview. Banks prefer to give loans against land held individually, whereas many Māori, as it was in our old times, own land communally, which makes it harder to borrow and invest within a Western transactional capitalist system. And of course, when the first Pākehā government was established, which has been described as a colonial dictatorship, by design it excluded Māori from voting, making it a very monocultural government. Naturally, the laws that flowed on from that were made with Pākehā benefit in mind, which is no doubt why Māori are disproportionately negatively represented in essentially every social metric we can see. Now, David Seymour is often well-mannered. He wears a suit. The assumption is that he's a sensible man, and he's Māori himself. Or is he?
Approach succeeds in both ways, and that's why if I was Māori, in fact, as it happens, I am Māori. I'd be giving my. I'd be giving. Well, I wanted to say hypothetically.
Ooh, probably just a slip of the tongue, or was it? The ACT Party are all about cutting government spending so we can reduce taxes, and their narrative around this is that it benefits everyone. After all, who doesn't want a tax cut? However, since the rich hoard most of our resources, tax is a way to claw some money back to spend on public services. These large-scale tax cuts that ACT wants will benefit the most wealthy, while plunging those who rely on these services into hardship. Furthermore, Aotearoa has some of the highest levels of inequality, with an economy that is reliant on stolen whenua Māori. Removing what little we have in the way of redistributing that wealth would only make these inequities worse. So that aside, let's talk about this Te Tiriti referendum that ACT are making a bottom line in coalition negotiations. In law, what gives Te Tiriti o Waitangi its power is the way the law interprets it. That interpretation gives us the treaty principles. In an attempt to take power away from the law's current interpretation of Te Tiriti, the ACT Party have their own new interpretation, where, for example, they mix two different documents, the differing English text, the Treaty of Waitangi, with the original Māori text, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, to create completely new sentences and meanings. There are three principles that the ACT Party are proposing, and they're all informed by the ACT Party's reinterpretation of the three articles within Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and it's clearly to deny the Māori right to self-determination. Here's reinterpretation number one. The New Zealand government has the right to govern New Zealand. In Te Tiriti, the reality is that Article 1 only gives the Crown, the government, the right to govern British settlers, not Māori. Reinterpretation of Article 2. The New Zealand government will protect all New Zealanders' authority over their land and other property. This is a sneaky one. It seeks to redefine Article 2 of Te Tiriti, which highlights Māori self-determination or Māori sovereignty, to say instead that Article 2 is simply about private property rights within the Crown's colonial system that they asserted in the previous reinterpretation number 3. All New Zealanders are equal under the law with the same rights and duties. Equally sneaky, this one sounds sensible, but it ignores the fact that before colonial rule was enforced over Māori, we enjoyed without restriction our own system's rights and duties. And now that a new system is being forced on us, ACT are calling for our Māori systems to be forgotten and for Māori to be fully assimilated into these foreign Pākehā systems. When you consider the Māori right to self-determination was never ceded, this scenario from ACT is like a foreigner coming over here today and them demanding we throw out all of our laws and adopt their foreign ones, which of course is what the Crown did in the colonial era. Can't we simply embrace our differences? Firstly, to my knowledge, the ACT Party have decided to avoid any expert advice in their reinterpretations, which is troubling when you consider their failed use of te reo Māori in the past.
He Māori aho mō ngā kaupapa haora.
Is that a supplementary question or?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Point of order.
Point of order, Rawiri Waititi.
I didn't hear a question in that supplementary.
No, that's why I asked. I heard a statement.
Mr. Speaker,
I have to say this. If you read Article 3 of the treaty in Te Reo Māori, nā tikanga reo tikitahi.
He Māori aho. This redefining of te tiriti isn't just racist, it's the most classic form of colonial racism. In 1840, a contract between Māori and the Crown was signed, called te tiriti o Waitangi. The Crown ignored it, rewrote it, and used their rewritten version to rape, pillage, steal, and everything else. The ACT Party's new interpretation would make things like the Māori Health Authority, which sets funding aside specifically to target Māori health inequities, illegal. It would remove the argument for Māori representation in government. Māori seats, Māori wards, gone. It would also make Māori land occupations more difficult, which takes power away from how Māori protest unjust colonial laws. Additionally, the very framing around the need for this referendum contributes to the idea that although Māori are at the bottom of most social statistics, Māori are somehow getting something that non-Māori are missing out on, which of course frames Māori, the most oppressed group, besides possibly our Pacifica whanaunga, as an elite group which leads people to push us further down rather than lifting us up so that we can all stand together. Like the example of the racist mayor in Kaupapa who's trying to ban all things Māori from the local council. And of course, when you dog whistle like this, you're emboldening racists like what we've seen recently as Te Pāti Māori candidate Hana Maipi Clark's home was ram-raided in a politically motivated attack. Finally, these new principles and this new interpretation of te tiriti further push the myth, or the spell, that keeps us locked into this colonial trance that Māori aren't entitled to self-determination, that we ceded our sovereignty and that right to the British Crown. Chloe Swarbrick was recently on the AM show calling out ACT's racism. David pushed Chloe for an example of this racism, to which she raised their referendum. And cue the gaslighting.
A fool's game.
So, Chloe, you said that there's policies that are race baiting. Can you name one? Anything that we've said?
A referendum on Te Tiriti o Waitangi, which is going to absolutely drag up some of the most unfortunate types of discussions in this country. I mean,
what you're essentially saying is that the New Zealand people cannot have a say on the constitutional future of their country because somebody might say something stupid. I think, frankly,
that's not what I've said.
That's exactly what you've said. And you've said that because
the ACT Party thinks we're all idiots. They're claiming to give people a say, but that's not what the referendum is about. ACT have already gone and done the rewriting. They don't want your opinion, but they give the illusion that they do. And more importantly, that's not how contracts work. David simply brushed off this example from Chloe, asking for another example. Probably surprised she had to provide additional homework, Chloe didn't give any additional examples. And I get it. The details of why this is racist can be hard to articulate. So the boy gets away with it again. But regardless of David's grin, his manners, and his suit, the man, his party, and their political strategy is without a doubt, hands down, racist as fuck. Not that there isn't room for redemption. Racism exists within all of us. What's important is our ability to observe it and to change it. In a nutshell, you can't be like ACT and claim to be non-racist for equal opportunities while trying to erase our rights to self-determination and actively opposing efforts to address inequities that we can see in front of us. Like the Ministry for Pacific Peoples, the one David dreams of Guy Fawkes blowing up. You know, get rid of the body that's designed to highlight the inequities and you can literally erase those inequities. on paper overnight. Kia mai e te iwi.